I want to dedicate this video to Dennis Pollock of the Beat Diabetes channel and to Butter Bob Briggs. They both help me keep it simple. Hello. Let's talk about keeping things simple. I think it's very, very important to keep things simple. I am in my office today, but I've taken the white coat off because I just want to talk to you today as one diabetic to another. One of the most important reasons to keep things simple is so that it will be sustainable. If we make our dietary changes, our nutritional program too complicated, there's a real danger that we will not be able to sustain that for the rest of our lives. And that's what we need to do, is make changes that we can sustain for a lifetime. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today. Again, as always on my channel, I'm primarily telling my own story of how I was able to control my diabetes without medication, just by dietary changes. And I want to give you some simple steps to do that, the simple steps that I used myself. The main thing, the number one thing that I did and that I feel all diabetics need to do is lower your carbohydrate intake. Try to lower it as much as you possibly can. I focused on total carbs rather than net carbs. I know some people look at net carbs, they subtract the carbohydrates that are fiber from the total carbs and then come up with net carbs. I focused on total carbohydrates, and I tried to keep that under 20 because I had a lot of work to do to reduce my A1C from a 9.9 to a 4.9. Cutting it in half essentially. And so keeping the carbohydrates really low, that's the number one thing that we can do as diabetics to have better results. And let me throw in here that too many people, doctors include, most doctors look at diabetes as a chronic progressive disease that's not going to get better, it's only going to get worse. You're going to start out on a little medication, then go to more and more, and eventually on insulin, and it's just going to get worse and worse. And along with that progression comes all the complications that diabetics face: kidney problems, circulation problems, neuropathy, eye problems. But I'm of the firm belief, and I believe I'm living proof, that it does not have to be chronic and progressive. You can control things with diet. And so the number one thing is to cut those carbs, cut them as much as you can. And the other simple thing, which you may not want to do, but it was critical for me, absolutely critical, was testing my blood glucose a lot. And by a lot, I mean I'd check it first thing in the morning, and then after I would eat something for the first time of the day, then I would check it usually about an hour later. Now, right at first, I was checking it at 30 minutes, 1 hour, and 2 hours to kind of see where my body peak, where I would peak after eating, and it was generally around 1 hour. So if you want to stick yourself 3 times after every time you eat, at least check it once at about the 1 hour mark and see what different foods do to you, and you'll learn real quickly which foods you can and can't do. That's the main thing that Dennis Pollock at the Beat Diabetes channel focuses on. It. He calls it Mike the Meter, his friend Mike the Meter, and he's talking about his glucose meter. And it is extremely important. It was probably one of the most. I'll say it was the second most powerful thing I did, was checking my blood glucose. Number one will be the next thing I talk about, which was fasting, intermittent fasting. That was probably the most powerful thing I did. But testing your blood glucose very frequently, after every time you eat. I don't check it after every meal now because it's been 19 months since I started all this, and I now just primarily just check my fasting glucose when I wake up in the morning, and because I now know which foods I really need to avoid. But early on, when you're trying to learn which foods are okay for you to eat and which foods you need to eliminate, checking that blood glucose as often as possible after you eat. Again, I started out checking it at 30 minutes, 1 hour, and 2 hours, and you might try that at first if you're just starting something like this. Find out when yours normally peaks. If it peaks at 30 minutes, you could just go to checking it every 30 minutes after you eat. If it peaks at 1 hour like mine, then you can just go to checking it 1 hour after. And I'll still do that some, like if we eat out at a restaurant, I'll try to check 1 hour later, because you're never sure what they're putting in the food. You may think you're ordering something that's low carb, but they may be adding sugar or other things that are high in carbohydrates at the restaurant. And so it's amazing how often they add sugar to stuff in restaurants. Even on a dry rub that they're putting on meat or something, you may think, well, I'm just eating meat, that's 0 carbs. But if they put a dry rub on there that has sugar, brown sugar in particular, like with a lot of barbecue places, that's carbohydrates, and that may affect your blood sugar, probably will. So going low carb, testing your blood glucose, number 2, and fasting. Fasting I would consider to be the most powerful thing I did. All 4 of these things are very powerful, but fasting for me was the most powerful because I didn't have to worry whether I was eating the right foods or how many carbs I was getting. If you're not eating at all, of course, my main routine was to eat once a day, have OMAD or 1 meal a day type. That was my fasting routine. Although early on, when I was so desperate to reduce my blood glucose, I did about 3 48-hour fasts and a couple of 72-hour fasts. But then I quickly got into a 1 meal a day routine, and that worked extremely well for me. So fasting, very powerful. When I did eat, going low carb as I could, and then also testing my blood sugar very, very often to see how I was doing. All those things very important. And it's only recently that I've learned how bad. I was probably about 6 months into my journey that I started hearing that vegetable oils, which really should be called seed oils, are not good for you, and that they're very inflammatory and just not good for you. And to avoid all those, that's margarine, that's Crisco, that's they call them vegetable oils because that's a better marketing terminology than calling them seed oils, I guess. But I've more recently, I knew, and I tried to stay away from vegetable oils, seed oils during the past 19 months, but it's only been real recently that I learned that there's a link between macular degeneration, a blinding type eye problem. You can have a link between seed oils or vegetable oils and macular degeneration. So I'm even more fanatical about that now. I almost hate to add that to my list of simple things, but I think it's too important not to add it. So those are 4 simple steps that I think everybody can do. Fasting is very powerful, keeping your carbs as low as possible, and then testing your glucose. Those 3 steps, if you could do those 3 things, you have amazing results. But if you'll just add that 1 step of keeping away from all the seed oils, it'll have amazing results for your health. And I want to quickly add one other thing. This does not have to be expensive. A program like this, where you attack your diabetes, a dietary program, does not have to be expensive. If you watch enough channels, you're going to learn that you might feel that you have to have the most expensive grass-fed ribeye steaks in order to do it correctly, and this does not have to be expensive. I mean, if you can afford the highest quality salmon, the highest quality grass-fed ribeye steaks and everything, wonderful, do it. But you do not have to do that to have success. But one thing I was always really impressed with Butter Bob Briggs about on his channel was that he was a factory worker. He had no doctorate degrees, a factory worker, he's a common man, and he wanted his program to be one that the common man could do. And he made that point over and over again, that it's not about having to have the most expensive stuff, the most expensive food in order to be successful. Butter Bob lost 145 pounds, a factory worker, a common man who bought most of his food at Walmart, but yet he understood the principles of going low carb, the easy steps that I've talked about there, and he kept his program simple. And that's all any of us have to do. I don't want to be guilty on this channel of making things complicated. I see so many YouTube channels. I know what it is. They're trying to add more and more content, more and more interesting content. But to someone out there that's desperate and they're watching everything that goes on to these channels, it can become very complicated, when they get into very complicated issues just to add content to their channel, add more and more videos for channel. I hope I never get to that point. I don't need to make money off of YouTube. I don't plan to ever make money off of YouTube. So I'm not going to be pressured to keep adding more and more content for monetary reasons. I have a good career. I don't need any money from YouTube, and so I'm going to resist that pressure to add content just for the sake of adding content so that I can get advertising dollars. I don't need advertising. I may never go through the steps that you have to go through to get advertising dollars on YouTube. I just want to provide help to people who struggle like I struggled. And I hope that when I first started my channel, I wasn't even going to mention what I do for a living. I wasn't going to emphasize any kind of doctor title or anything, because I wanted to really just talk diabetic to diabetic and tell my story and share what I did. But then Dennis Pollock with Beat Diabetes interviewed me, and that was his first question, was what do you do for a living? And so the cat was kind of out of the bag there. And then many of the subscribers that I have on this channel came over from that interview, so the majority already knew what I do for a living. And then it just seemed natural that I should mention, since I'm in eye care, that I should mention some of the eye-related problems that come from diabetes. So I did that, but I wasn't doing that to try to scare you or to try to complicate matters. I only did that because once people knew that what I do for a living, I thought it was almost an obligation to go ahead and explain some of the eye-related problems that diabetics can have. But only did that with the goal of motivating you to do these 4 easy steps of watching your carbs and doing some fasting. Those are the most important things, and then testing yourself all the time to make sure you're doing it right. If you do those simple things, you don't have to worry about all the extremely complicated stuff that you can find on YouTube. I went down those rabbit trails, and it can kind of become overwhelming. But at any rate, keep it simple so that you can sustain it. And remember, live healthy, finish strong.